afternoon. My name is Sylvia Iriondo, and I am president of MAR por Cuba, Mothers and Women Against Repression, an organization member of the Assembly of the Cuban Resistance, a coalition of groups both inside the island and abroad that work together to help bring about true democratic change in Cuba after more than 6 decades under a brutal totalitarian communist rule. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak before this important forum that brings together such a distinguished group of parliamentarians, organizations, civic leaders, and human rights activists on the subject of Cuba's dire internal situation, medical slavery, mercenarism, external interference, and the untenable European Union-Cuba Accord. I commend its organizers, especially Senator Giulio Maria Terzi di Santa Agata, for bringing us together. I come to you as one of thousands of Cuban political refugees who had to leave our country of birth in search for freedom, as one who has never wavered in the resolve to help rescue Cuba and its people from the yoke of communist rule, as one that witnessed and survived one of the most heinous crimes against humanity committed by the regime under direct orders from dictators Fidel and Raúl Castro, the massacre of 4 Brothers to the Rescue volunteer pilots and spotters on February 24th, 1996, in international airspace while conducting a search and rescue humanitarian flight in the Straits of Florida to save the lives of men, women, and children escaping the island prison in flimsy and precarious rafts, many of whom never made it to shore. I come to you as a woman who could have been the mother, wife, daughter, or sibling of one of my fellow Cubans murdered, imprisoned, tortured, or denied the most basic human rights by this regime. I come to you on behalf of the Cuban people in the island who yearn, like you and me, to live and raise their families in freedom. As I share my thoughts about Cuba's internal situation, the first thing that comes to mind is the resiliency and resistance of the Cuban people, who bear the brunt of the monumental failures of a corrupt regime that has ruled them with an iron fist for 65 years and which has deprived them of each and every God-given fundamental liberties and rights. The regime blames external factors as the culprits for everything that is wrong in the island. Don't be fooled. The only culprit to blame for this disaster is the regime and its failed communist system. The regime, as well as their comrades, sympathizers, and apologies around the world, export the narrative that blames all of Cuba's ills and problems on the so-called United States embargo as the reason for the Cuban people's needs, dismal living conditions, woes, and discontent. It is categorically not so. The only real embargo that exists in Cuba and needs to be lifted is the embargo imposed by the regime upon the liberties and rights of the Cuban people. For far too long, the democratic world has allowed a false narrative to flourish and undermine the Cuban people's efforts for regime change. Our world has been hearing this false narrative actively disseminated and promoted by the regime with the help of their cronies and enablers. As freedom-loving people, we need to own the narrative. Reasons abound. We need to disseminate the truth. We need to stand up to these lies. Under this communist and ruthless regime, Cuba is a failed state in every category. Repression is systematically used as a weapon against the population to quash discontent by force. On July 11, 2024, thousands of Cubans spontaneously took to the streets from one end of the island to the other in a courageous civic peaceful uprising to demand freedom and rights. Today, there are still more than 1,100 Cuban political prisoners in the regime's prisons under infrahuman conditions, among them 118 women and 30 minors. The medical missions sent abroad constitute slavery in the worst kind. The regime is paid substantial amounts by the governments in the countries to which these doctors are sent to work. In return, the regime pays the Cuban professionals a minimal fraction of the amount received and pockets the difference. This provides a much-needed major source of funds to the regime. Hundreds of Cubans have been recruited in the island as mercenaries to fight for Russia against Ukraine in what is an unprovoked and brutal invasion and war. There is no way this could have happened without the knowledge and approval of the regime's power hierarchy. As for foreign interference, in addition to the Cuban soldiers' participation in Russia's war against Ukraine, we just need to take a look at the map of the Western Hemisphere. The cancer that originated in Cuba in 1959 has spread and metastasized in various neighboring countries, such as Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bolivia, and continues to be a threat to others. I raise my voice in support of the position taken by parliamentarian Herman Tertsch and others in demanding that the European Union immediately review the agreement for political dialogue and cooperation with Cuba and suspends all subsidies to those associated with this criminal dictatorship and to the dictatorship itself. The regime is a total failure and has proven it is incapable to change its criminal ways and means. The truth is that it is not our free world or us that need to change, but the regime itself. Towards that end, we must direct our collective efforts. We appreciate your vital support to curtail funds and subsidies to the dictatorship. These funds do not help the Cuban people. Instead, these funds provide the resources that the regime desperately needs to remain in power, to sustain its repressive apparatus, and to export their revolution. Our people's hunger is for freedom. They have faced death, repression, incarceration, separation, and torture for it. They have courageously fought for it. They have languished in Cuba's prison under subhuman conditions for it. They have resisted and continue to resist and live for it. The word is freedom. They deserve our utmost support. Together, we can accelerate the dawn of freedom for Cuba. As the dictator and power elite desperately knock on doors seeking funds in order to sustain its rule, your work is crucial. We truly appreciate your leadership and support at this critical moment in history, in which your solidarity can turn out to be the catalyst that helps end, once and for all, the suffering of the Cuban people and the expansion of a failed communist doctrine that undermines the democratic values, principles, and security of our free world. Thank you for hearing me out and for inviting me to this important conference.